Frankly, I think it's make or break. So today, there isn't such a thing as flexible demand on a bigger scale. And if it stays like this, then we will not have either a cheap or a clean power system.
Asset level, renewable economics have been challenged due to cannibalization, curtailment, negative prices. That's where we are right now.
Most people think electricity is energy, and they forget about the other almost 80% of our energy use, which is not electricity. It's primarily fossil fuels burned for heat and for mobility. And only now we're waking up to the fact that this is going to be the huge challenge of the next phase of the transition.
Europe is rapidly expanding renewables capacity, in particular solar and wind generation. In this episode, we ask, can the rest of the system keep up? It's with great pleasure that I'm welcoming Lion Hirth, who's Professor of Energy Policy at Hertie School, to this podcast. A warm welcome to you, Lion.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, what we're going to be discussing today is really how can Europe keep accelerating renewables deployment and the green transition without fundamentally redesigning how power markets and grids operate. But a first question really, so as renewable penetration rises, we're building out solar and wind, massively. Are we reaching a point where cannibalization fundamentally undermines the economics of new wind and solar projects? So are we scaring away investors at the same time?
I think what's fair to say that in many aspects, or in a couple of aspects, we are encountering problems that we used to discuss as system integration challenges, and cannibalization is one of them. So I think what we're learning is that system transformation, kind of the second half, going from 50 to 100%, wind and solar is trickier and more difficult than going from 0 to 50%. Not because the technology has become different, right? Wind turbines are available and scalable, and solar is cheaper than ever before. But because the rest of the system, grids and storage and backup and system management and operations and markets is tricky, and there's hurdles and problems to be solved. I'm confident we will, but we will need to work on this.
So the problems are clear. How do we solve these problems, especially with the cannibalization, with the constraints in the grid, and curtailment issue? I mean, is part of the problem here that Germany was a front runner, amazing advances in renewables deployment for many, many years, but the system pays producers even though their production is curtailed, or even they've got no incentive to curtail because they're getting paid anyway. Is that part of the problem, how those markets were designed in the first place?
Yeah, I think you mentioned a whole series of problems. So let's maybe pick out a few. So one challenge is, and we've seen this very recently, 1st of May, a day there was a public holiday across most of Europe, and it was pretty sunny, it was rather cool, a little bit of wind also, and we've seen negative prices very close to minus 500 euros on the day ahead auction, but also Benelux and France was really deeply negative. And that's an indication, of course, that we're producing more electricity that we can get rid of, which is ironic because this is technologies that are so easy to switch off, right? A solar panel is much more easy to switch off than hydro plants and fossil plants and nuclear plants and even a wind turbine. Yet we don't do this, and the problem is, of course, how we organize production. This is mostly small-scale solar, running under feed-in tariffs and in self-consumption optimization under fixed-price tariffs, retail tariffs, which means they don't have an incentive to turn off. They just keep producing, and they often lack the technology and the system integration and the IT and the APIs to get them reliably turned off. And I was a bit scared, actually, on 1st of May. I was concerned that we're going to break the system. And we all know if we're going to get a big contingency, a major system split, or even a localized brownout or blackout, the political backlash would be tremendous. So I think everyone in the energy industry is very much aware and is working hard to avoid this. And having renewables reliably turn off when we have excess, when we have too much energy in the grid, is something that's just a precondition. And that's something we didn't need to think about at 10% or 20% solar, but we have to think about this when we go from 20 to 30 to 40% solar on an annual basis, because that means we will always and very often have situations where we have much more energy. We could produce much more energy than we can actually digest, and then we have to stop producing.
So do you have faith in the policymakers, certainly in Berlin and local politicians, to sort this out?
Faith is a big word. I think on the working level, on the level of staffers and civil servants, there's a lot of awareness about this, as of course is on among system operators and TSOs, and has been for a long while. It's not new. Like, no one is really very much surprised about this. I'm less sure about senior policymakers and parliamentarians and those who draft the laws, and I'm a little bit concerned that that politicians sort of love to talk about small modular reactors and fusion energy and data centers and sort of the big stuff they read in the news, and that sort of gets clicks on social media. But the boring stuff of sort of reliable system operations is getting much less attention. And I just hope that our governing bodies and lawmaking entities, sort of the machines, work well enough to get this all going. I'm broadly confident that this is the case, but I'm not sure. If you ask me, would I bet money on we don't get on 1st of May of this year? I was nervous. I was nervously looking at the data the whole day, and I was cautious and concerned that something might go wrong. So among my peers, I did a bit of a survey, and people put the chances of a major incident between 5 and 10%, most of them, on that day. And hell, that's way too much. Like, we don't want to have a situation where we have a 5% chance of a major incident. Like, we don't want to be there. Like, we want to be at 99.99% reliability at any point in time, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you've highlighted the potential backlash would be enormous. But if we look at some solutions here, so if we say, in terms of, curtailment is increasingly common across Europe. Is it a grid problem? Is it a market design problem? Or simply the cost of moving too slowly on flexibility and storage? What needs to happen here, Leon?
I think it's all of the above, right? It's all of the above. But let's start with the obvious solution. It's just very common and will be very common, and it's perfectly normal that we have so much wind and solar capacity that we don't need it all the time. It's same for conventionals, right? Also, we have a lot of gas and coal plants that we stop. We don't call those curtailment, we just call it turning off or whatever. But sort of no one would ask a coal plant that could theoretically run 24/7 to actually run 24/7 when we don't need the electricity. And the same for solar and wind. Just because the variable costs are zero doesn't mean that they need to run always when we need them, right? The value of these technologies is still tremendous if they provide energy 95% of the time when they could produce, but curtail the other 5%, because either there's a localized surplus or there's a system-wide surplus. So that's just perfectly normal, and many people have kind of an emotional response sort of against wind turbines standing still in a windy condition, but it's just very normal. It should be. Second is, of course, better than wasting the energy is using it, right? And for many reasons, we need to scale up batteries quickly, and the preferred technology certainly is large-scale utility scale batteries, because they are much better integrated in markets and provide system services and are sort of are professionally managed. And across Europe, we are running into constraints here, right? Again, the technology is becoming cheaper and cheaper. Cell prices have gone down 90% or what since 2010. And also the whole system integration. I mean, the kind of the packaged, ready-to-use assets that you can buy from China. It's just like cheap, reliable, scalable, ready to build. But the problem is, of course, grids, right? Getting grid connection. And if you get a grid connection, getting a grid connection that you can actually use, not a flexible grid connection, which of course isn't flexible, but it's quite the opposite. Flexible grid connection agreements, FCAs, really mean you can't use it when how you want it as a BESS, as a flexible assets. And this is for a reason. Grid operators are concerned for battery grid impact for good and bad reasons, but also for good reasons. The grid impact is real, and we need to figure out rules and regulation and incentives that kind of get the best out of batteries, which means making them operating in a way that they don't hurt the grid, but they reduce congestion and reduce grid problems to the possible extent, and hence bring them online on larger scale.
But I mean, the part of the issue here is, it's been very widely reported the extent of the queues amongst the grid operators for the batteries. So this would be, you're saying this would be an elegant way of dealing with the problem of what I've called the 3 Cs, the cannibalization, the congestion, and the curtailment issues.
It wouldn't make the physics go away, right? So if you have a region with a lot of solar energy and limited transmission constraints, then of course, if there's too much energy, then the system can either digest or export. Then you need to curtail, right? But regional markets, regional wholesale markets, are of course the best way to organize flexibility, right? To make batteries locally charge and make consumers locally consume, if this is hydrogen electrolysis or heavy industry or smart charging of cars or heat pumps in winter, to organize these million of assets so they actually do consume mostly when and where there's abundance, and try to save energy and shift load to other times when and where there's scarcity of energy. That's the whole idea of the electricity market. And this is a problem that's increasingly short term, like changes happen on just hours before they're there, because a lot of solar and wind is installed, and weather forecast errors just become bigger with the installed capacity. So we need to kind of organize the response, organize the uptake and the flexibility, both quicker and more local. And that's exactly what power markets are built for.
I mean, you mentioned the demand side. I mean, how important is flexible demand in solving the next phase of the energy transition? And do you think, which sectors do you think are best positions to prove it to provide it at scale?
Frankly, I think it's make or break. So today there isn't such a thing as flexible demand on a bigger scale, almost anywhere. Like, demand is up to date despite the progress that some countries have made, really not responding to system needs, to prices and signals in any meaningful way. And if it stays like this, then we will not have either a cheap or a clean power system. It's a precondition. We'll need this, and from an engineering perspective, it's also such a no-brainer, right? If you have a car, you have to charge it on average maybe 30 minutes per day. Why should you do this at 5 p.m. during system peak and grid load peak? Like, why on earth? Why not 3 a.m. and why not maybe if you're charging at work at 1 p.m. during the solar peak? I mean, you almost get crazy, right? Because it's such an obvious solution and such a low cost or zero cost solution. We just have to organize things, and just organizing things is a bit more complicated and lengthy than we would like to have. And the components that we need to solve for this is regional wholesale markets, which we already discussed, reform of grid tariffs, and dynamic pricing and corresponding metering, which is of course a big headache, especially in my country.
But it's changing the mindset as well, isn't it? There's like, you want people to change their behavior according to market signals. Just a final sort of question as well, Leon. So the solutions are there; they're on the table. It's more, the people who need to enact this need the courage and the conviction to push it through. Is that what you're also saying here?
I am, and that's of course a big deal, right? So we talked about regional wholesale markets, which is a very political issue because a lot of policymakers have really entrenched themselves into nets and just say no without considering this, which is a problem because that's not easy to solve, right? Another issue is smart metering and dynamic tariffs. Many countries have gotten there. Germany has been trying for 15 years, and we have developed a solution that no one else has even thought of, which we call a smart meter gateway. And I think that's a good example of of Germany as a country having difficulties in software engineering, but also it's an example of the perfect is the enemy of the good. Like we've been trying to really make this perfect, and the result is that it's not there. It's taking up, but it's taking up speed painfully slowly. So yes, I do agree. Sort of the solutions are there; they just have to be enacted. But just enacting them is a harder nut to crack than it may sound.
It's certainly much easier said than done. Leon, thank you very much for being a guest on the Plugged In podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, if falling capture prices and market cannibalization are becoming bigger challenges for renewable generators, the next question is how developers and investors are adapting. Power purchase agreements and new merchant strategies are playing an increasingly important role in managing that risk. To explain how those markets are evolving, I spoke to Luca Pedretti, Chief Product Officer and co-founder of Pexapark.
Welcome back to the pod, Luca.
Richard, glad to be back.
We're talking about the saturation potentially of renewables in Europe. If I'd just like to start off by asking you, how significantly are cannibalization and falling capture prices now affecting renewable project economics and PPA pricing?
Well, they're massively impacting them. I think a few years ago we had a show together and we called it the Coming Energy Wobbles. I think we're energy transition wobbles and we're right into it. I think asset level renewable economics have been challenged due to cannibalization, curtailment, negative prices. That's where we are right now.
I heard, I was in Sweden, we were talking here at the start of June. I was in Sweden at the end of May, and I said that no new PPA deals were made in Sweden in the first half of this year. Is that a surprise, Luca?
No, it's no surprise. I think we saw the market stagnating or even reducing in volumes by 20% last year. But it is an energy transition. So we're transitioning from one state to the other. I think we had 90 gigawatts of PPAs built or contracted over the last 7 years. And now we have the equal volumes even faster being built on FPAs, which enable storage, flexibility purchase agreement. The market is still very large on the PPA side, but it's shifting from long-term to short-term. At some point, the system will be built. We're going into a renewable-dominated market, and they cannot absorb 15, 20 gigawatt or more of new build every year.
And that produces that wobble that we've talked about before, Luca. Are investors becoming more cautious about merchant exposure as volatility and negative pricing increase?
Well, it always has been top of the mind. I think investors and developers or lenders, there is a premium paid for secured revenues. It just takes more work. I think also when we see on the minimal duration of PPAs, they have become shorter, but there is a minimum threshold, 7-8 years, which you need to contract. And as I said, it takes more work. And one big trend which we see is that we shouldn't think of revenue certainty just on asset level. So you should see it on a portfolio level. When you combine wind, solar, battery, or even other technologies, you can achieve stable returns, stable revenues.
And where is that happening? Where do you think that's where the prospects are best for that kind of portfolio, Luca?
I think what we're definitely seeing is a consolidation in the IPP asset management space. So you see ever bigger owners. When there has been a theme over the last 10 years is this scale. So big portfolios are now 7 gigawatts, 5 gigawatts, and they're multi-technology, multi-country. So we're seeing it in all core markets, Italy, Spain, Germany. The better the markets are integrated, like on the continental shelf, the easier it is to actually achieve those portfolio effects.
Where are you currently seeing the biggest bottlenecks for renewable deployment? So, is it permitting? Is it grid access? Is it financing or just market uncertainty, Luca?
The whole thing altogether.
Oh, really? Yeah. How would you rank them? Luca?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think right now, top of mind, definitely on an asset level, is can I secure demand? Can I secure stable revenues and get financing and order returns right? I think cannibalization was much faster than expected. And it wasn't offset by falling costs on the technology side, which has been a big theme on the solar side for 10 years. But there's also progress. I think we see positive policy and regulatory development in many markets. On the permitting side, things are improving, but also we need to acknowledge how much progress we've made. When we started 10 years ago, man, I mean, solar capture was above baseload. Yeah, at midday, I just remember this was peak pricing time. And now it's just the opposite. Renewable integration, we were laughing at 5 to 6% and discussing whether this is actually feasible to do. Now we have markets with 50% all over Europe. So huge progress. Yes, progress leads to problem. And now we solve them away with storage and co-location over the next 1-2 years. So I think challenges always will be there, but private market and actors will find solutions.
Absolutely. So in terms of what are the kind of policy regulatory positive outcomes that you'd like to highlight there, Luca?
I think we see permitting reform all over. We're seeing structural discussion on how shall consumers and producers be incentivized on the grid. I must also say these are battles. I think it's not easy to change those. You see discussions around locational pricing. But overall, I think across markets, we see a huge effort to improve conditions, to create demand, improve credit side, everything. And it takes a while. I think it's nothing which you do quickly. And in the end, energy grids are the modern foundation of our societies. Huge trillions of euros invested, and change overall is slow, even if you're very happy about those tens of gigawatts being built every year.
Absolutely. Is there anything, if we're sticking with policy and regulatory, is there anything more you'd like to see on the EU side of things?
Yeah, I think for me it's interconnection. So if I could just change one thing, it would be having massively more intragrid and intergrid connections. Like, look, Spain to France, no real progress. It would be so beneficial then. Just across the market, this is too slow, and it has the biggest impact economically in integration, but also in security of everyone's supply. So I think this is where I would ask for the biggest change. And otherwise, keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible. We have seen that private markets, if the conditions are stable and certain, they will find ways to finance and deploy capital.
Keep it simple and an increasingly complex electricity system there, Luca.
Yes, it is more complex, but it always has been a very complex system. And yes, we're digitizing the whole system. We're thinking it more from the demand side, but these are positive things. I think we still have huge sectors in the wider energy system where not much has happened. 20%, 80% of the distribution grid are not yet utilized. Yeah? Demand side is not yet really incentivized to act flexible. We still have huge legacy fleets of subsidy renewables which don't react to market signals. So there's so much to do, but complexity is an issue when we see CBAM, when we see, it feels like every month there's a new book of regulations coming out. Maybe I'm now sounding a bit over the top, but it is a concern.
I mean, you see on the grid side as well, or on the balancing and intraday, certainly increased complexity, and moving down to the granularity of 15 minutes is certainly adding to that as well. However necessary that was, Luca, if we turn to the developers, how are they adapting their strategies in response to curtailment risk and changing market dynamics?
I think on the developer side, I would say what is very interesting is like how is asset design changing? Like you need to think about how your asset fits with the grid, and can you ramp it up? Can you ramp it down? Does it fulfill all the data aspects? Whereas on the owner side, it is more about, do I get all the data? Do I have the team and tools in place to actually day-to-day manage it, because so much more value and risk is now in the actual operation of the assets.
No, absolutely. So looking ahead, Luca, what practical changes would most improve investment confidence and allow renewables in Europe to continue at scale?
I think it's those policy intervention which we discussed. So you see it in Spain or in Italy, it takes a while, but when you have systems in place like MOXE that are properly designed, you see capital flocking in. The other element was interconnection, this and electrification on my side, I would add, because it adds structural demand. This is a bit what I see on my wish list.
But you don't think there's not a case to sort of redraw the whole market design that we currently have? I mean, we continue along making little tweaks, or
I think so. That's the most realistic. It's incremental change, reform by reform. To be seen whether it works. I think for me, probably one of the most important questions which I will be personally looking out for is what type of gas are we building? Like, will it be baseload CCGTs, or are we building flexible gas peakers that are designed to also work with capacity markets?
and the urgency is only going to increase, I think, as we can sort of witness what's happening in the Gulf. Thank you very much for being a guest on the Plugged In podcast, Luca. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Richard.
So, while the market is finding new ways to finance renewable projects, the bigger question is whether Europe's energy system is evolving quickly enough to support the next phase of the transition. Is the challenge really renewable saturation, or is it that electrification, flexibility, and demand simply aren't keeping pace? To explore that bigger picture, I spoke to Jan Rosenow, Energy Programme Leader and Professor of Energy and Climate Policy.
A warm welcome to Plugged In, Jan.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get now into a little bit of the nitty gritty, Jan. Do you think we've reached renewable saturation, or are today's challenges, congestion, curtailment, negative prices, are they evidence that the rest of the energy system is failing to keep up the pace with renewables growth?
I think so. And there's sort of, I would say there's at least three elements here. One is flexible demand side flexibility. So really low cost or negative cost indicate that there is an opportunity to store really cheap electricity and then dispatch it later on through storage, or using thermal batteries in industry and storing electricity in the form of heat and then using it later on for process heat in industry. And that is now slowly, or maybe a bit faster now than a few years back, starting to get deployed. But that's one of the opportunities, I think, to take advantage of low-cost electricity. And once you do that, you will see less periods where you have really low prices, because there is an opportunity to absorb that electricity. I think the second element is demand-side response. We still have a huge potential that we haven't leveraged on the demand side, and that includes households and businesses, to respond to price signals, shift their load away from peak hours when it's expensive to hours when you have an abundance of clean energy supply. So that's the second element, and there's still huge potential to do that. Some countries have been doing rather well on that front, others not so well. So that's the second element. And then I think the third is grids. Often this is also an imbalance in the European or in the regional grids, where you might have lots of renewables in one part, and you have high demand in another, but they're not connected, and you can't get that cheap electricity to where it's needed. So that's the third element. We have to maybe better in building assets where they're needed, where they make sense from a system perspective, and also be able to shift electricity around Europe, and that means more interconnection. That means a bigger grid, a better interconnected grid.
So absolutely. You mentioned flexibility, demand side response. There's been a lot of focus on supply. Should policy makers be focusing on those areas and more than they're currently doing?
I've always worked on the demand side. My entire career was devoted to working energy demand, and only now it's become the center of attention, because electricity is now largely decarbonized. There's still work to be done, but it's now about the demand side, and it's all about shifting the demand side from burning and combusting fossil fuels to using electricity, to put it crudely. And that's a demand side transition. Policy is not yet on top of that. We're still in a debate where most people think electricity is energy, and they forget about the other almost 80% of our energy use, which is not electricity. It's primarily fossil fuels burned for heat and for mobility. And only now we're waking up to the fact that this is going to be the huge challenge of the next phase of the transition, is to tackle that. And that's a demand side transition fundamentally, not a supply side transition. Of course, the supply side will have to evolve with it, but we now know how to do that.
Absolutely. And what about incentives for demand side, for customers, either be they industrial users or retail households? Are the incentives in place for them to switch or to adjust their use of electricity?
Not sufficiently. I mean, there are good examples and very bad examples across Europe. I mean, that is from ranging from sort of taxation of electricity. You know, if you overtax electricity and undertax fossil fuels, you artificially inflate the price gap between electricity and gas prices, for example, which disincentivizes electrification, or an absence of time of use price signals, so where you incentivize consumption of electricity during periods when electricity is abundant and cheap, and you disincentivize its use when it's very expensive and the grid is congested. We still don't have a lot of that across Europe. I mean, it's picking up speed, but it's not enough yet. And also location. I mean, locational pricing is something that is quite far advanced in the US, but in Europe, we're pretty behind, pretty much behind when it comes to locational pricing. So better price signals, we need them. If we don't have them, it's going to cost us more. It's as simple as that, because we will make the wrong decisions incentivized by the wrong price signals, which then lead to higher system costs that we all have to pay for.
Well, Germany and the UK, you're German living in the UK, so they both decided against sort of zonal prices, haven't they? So there's still a lot to catch up, especially with the US on that front. But how important are technologies such as electric vehicles, heat pumps, and industrial electrification in absorbing those growing volumes of green power?
I think hugely important and very flexible. That's the advantage. Especially electric vehicles are, of course, incredibly flexible and a great resource to balance a more variable supply side. And even in home heating and industry, there is ample opportunity for flexibility. We now know from companies that run flexibility programs with heat pumps that it does work, and people are willing to offer flexibility within certain constraints, right? I mean, you don't want your home to be freezingly cold or super hot because it's been preheated, but within certain boundaries, people are very willing to give away maybe some controllability and offer flexibility if they see a significant saving. And the same goes for industry. Industry can be much more flexible if we encourage it to be more flexible. It doesn't have to be 24/7 static demand at all. It can be much more flexible than people think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with electric vehicles, I'm interviewing at the Electric conference, but and it was, you made very clearly, it was very interesting. You had some excellent slides about the uptake of electric vehicles across Europe. I mean, the town where I live, or the country I live in, it has been has increased the use of electric vehicles rapidly. I drive one. But if you have 100,000 of electric vehicles, you're taking between 5 and 7 kilowatts, it's 7 euro cents a kilowatt hour. That's a huge amount of electricity that you have that you can adjust.
Exactly, and that's the point. You can adjust. I think that's the important part of the sentence there that you just said, because I think it's often then assumed, everybody plugs in and charges at the same time, but that's an unrealistic scenario, because most people don't charge every single day. They might be charging the car once a week, and that's enough for their commute. Some people will go on a longer trip and use a rapid charger. There are lots of different charging patterns, and diversity is actually good. It's helpful. And for those who have home charging, I mean, you can very easily, and it's already happening, have a cheap tariff that encourages nighttime charging when demand is low, and electricity is cheap, and thereby shift load away from peak hours, and actually even have vehicle to grid now, where we see still very small share of the market, but we start seeing that coming in, where EV owners can benefit from actually trickling electricity back into the grid, and then earning some revenues from that. So I think EVs are probably the easier part of electrification because they are really quite flexible and have this ability to store electricity.
Absolutely. Once you get heavy transport on board as well, then that's going to be a win situation.
100%, and we see it with buses now and depot charging, light so trucks, and I think heavy duty is now also happening. Again, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, that wasn't quite so clear. There was a lot of debate, will that all be hydrogen or biofuels? But I think it's now very clear that even heavy duty is probably going to be mainly fully electric.
And how about energy efficiency? Is that getting forgotten here? Are there sort of gains to be made in promoting that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, it's often forgotten, and it's always a Cinderella of the transition. Never been taken seriously enough, in my view. And electrification is efficiency. I mean, when you look at electrified processes, they are vastly more efficient than combustion processes. That is feeding directly into energy demand. So we sort of modeled what this would mean in a hypothetical scenario of very high electrification using existing technologies and using clean electricity. Overall, we're seeing about a 50% reduction in primary energy use just by electrifying and by switching from fossil fuels to renewables. And that's a massive saving without even thinking about maybe we can incentivize people to drive their car less and move to public transport, or insulate their homes, or incentivize process optimization in industry. So if we also add some of these other things on, we can more than halve our energy demand by being smart about it. But it's not yet it's reached, I think. We're still discussing whether we should get more oil and gas out of the North Sea, rather than thinking about the opportunity for reducing energy demand in the first place, which I think is a missed opportunity.
Absolutely. We need the smart thinking here, and that's where you come in, Jan. They're very important. So if we were recording this 5 years from now, Jan, and what would success look like?
5 years from now, I would like to see Europe having built a lot more storage. First of all, battery storage, of course, grid connected, but also thinking much more about long durational storage. Seeing, of course, continuous build out of renewables. That's a sort of a given, I think. Much better grid management, and finding ways of also optimizing the grid that we already have, rather than just focusing on building new transmission lines and upgrading the distribution system, but also optimizing what we have and using it better. And then electrification rate has to go up. We can't stay at 23% of what it is currently. That has to go up, and has to go up quite fast if we want to get on track to where we need to be, and phasing out fossil fuels and imports. We got to go much faster on electrification. So in 5 years' time, I would love us to see being much more electrified, and have a much cleaner power system to back up that electrified economy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jan, for being a guest on the Plugged In Summer Series.
Thanks for having me.
And to you listeners, thanks for listening to this episode of Plugged In. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like, rate, and follow to make sure you get the latest podcast episodes as soon as we release them every Thursday. Finally, you can head to montelnews.com for more news and analysis from our team of journalists across Europe and beyond. See you next time.